This morning, we're going to talk about the future of robotic surgery. We're going to lay a little foundation of how things are now and how we got here. And then we're going to talk about what could be coming in the next 10, 20, or 30 years. Now, before we do that, I want to say that this is a custom presentation that I do on the future of robotic surgery, AI, surgical instrumentation. These can be created for your organization. If you want to show this at an internal company meeting, a marketing event, a conference, or even an ACCME accredited event. This presentation can be between 20 and 60 minutes as fits your schedule. And if you'd like to discuss it, please contact me via LinkedIn or my website. All right, so let's start looking at robotic surgery in the future. About 10 years ago, Google decided to get into the robotic surgery business with Verb Surgical. And they put out this history or this framework for how surgery has evolved over the centuries. They said that surgery 1.0 was essentially open surgery, where people would cut you open and stick their hands in and attempt to fix whatever was wrong with you on the inside. 2.0 was minimally invasive surgery, where you would cut small keyholes in the abdomen and insert long, thin instruments in so that you did a lot less damage than you would with a big incision for your hand. 3.0 was robotic assisted surgery, where you attached a large robotic device to the outside of those minimally invasive instruments, and you did the operation roughly the same, but with the robot, you could add tremor filtration and a lot more fine manipulation and magnification that you couldn't do with minimally invasive surgery. And then they proposed that surgery 4.0 would be an information-guided procedure, where you give information to the robot and it knows about the anatomy and the procedure you're trying to do and the process that you're trying to work through. And the robot itself participates in the surgery. It helps the surgeon rather than leaving the surgeon to do all the work themselves. Well, that's the kind of future that we're going to be talking about in this presentation. And before we move into that, I want to emphasize how rapidly robots have evolved in surgery. The first one was used in 1985 when somebody took an industrial robotic arm and gave it a brain biopsy needle and asked it to insert that needle into the brain from a specific origin point to a specific depth and at a very specific angle. And the robotic arm could do that more precisely than the human hand because it didn't wobble and waver in the same way. And then in the 1990s, the military's DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, got involved in this process because they envisioned a future in which telesurgery could be done onto the battlefield so that a soldier injured on the battlefield could be brought to the instrumentation side of a robot, but the surgeon could be sitting many miles or hundreds of miles away doing the surgery from a safe location. They successfully invented all of the hardware that was necessary for the surgeon to sit down in a cockpit-like console and do the surgery. And they successfully invented the robotic arms that would be operating on the soldier. But at that time, it wasn't possible to implement the long-distance telesurgery over the communication lines. Now, recognizing that there was just that one flaw in the system, Intuitive Surgical acquired all of the IP from those projects and turned it into the robotic system that we know today as the Da Vinci. And they started selling their first Da Vinci robot in 2000. That was the beginning. Here we are 23 years later, and we've come a very long way. The Intuitive Da Vinci machine is still a very widely used and very powerful in the market. Robotic surgery in general has become both ubiquitous and uncommon. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is that robots have been invented to do dozens, maybe even hundreds of different kinds of procedures on the human body. You can have abdominal surgery with Da Vinci and all the ones of its form factor. You can have hip and knee surgery, robotic surgery, spinal surgery, brain surgery, surgery on your lungs, and microsurgery on eyes, ears, and ligaments. All of those kinds of devices have been created, and some of them are FDA approved. However, there are many more procedures that have never seen robotic assistance. And it's uncommon for a patient to go in to see a surgeon and have a procedure recommended that uses a robot. There are still tens of thousands or millions of procedures that are not done with a robot, in which a robot may be available. Now, what I mean by ubiquitous is there are over 100 companies that are bringing robotic surgical devices to the market, and many of these are already in the market and available in hospitals now. This is a chart that I started creating 10 years ago. And when I started, I had 18 companies and robots on the chart. And over the past 10 years, that has grown to over 100. And it continues to grow faster than I can update the chart. So the chart is now conceptually illustrating how big this field is, even if every single company isn't listed on it. And it's really, really difficult to give any kind of presentation or introduction to robotic surgery and then say, let me explain to you 116 different devices. So what I've done is organize those 116 different devices into 4 different modalities. Almost all of those robots fall into one of these 4 categories. They're either a surgeon extension, where they take the movements of a surgeon's hands and feet and head, eyes, and transfer it to the surgical side of the robot. And they add scaling of visuals, they add stability of your hand tremor, and make the procedure more precise and better. There are assistive guides which don't actively transfer surgeon's movements, but instead they put guardrails around what the surgeon can and cannot do. Prior to an operation starting, the surgeon will load their intended paths into the robot and identify specifically which pieces of bone, for example, that they want to remove during the surgery. And then the robot will enforce the paths that accomplish what the surgeon said he wanted to do. And the third category is programmable automata. There are a few that not only take the preoperative plan and then hold you to the guidelines, they actually take that preoperative plan and execute what you told it to do. And so the surgery is done completely by the robotic system based on a plan that was created by the human surgeons. And the human surgeon's job at surgical time is simply to hit the big red button that says go or that says stop, and watch for things that might go wrong during the surgery. And then the last category is laparoscopic instruments that have been motorized in some way. They've been given motors or gears or joints or sensors so that they can do 1 or 2 of the fancy manipulations that robots in the surgeon extension category can do. And if you can understand those 4 categories, you understand more than 100 of the different robots that are out there in the market today. So that's where we stand right now. If you want to look into the future, you can do that by reading journal papers and the very many textbooks that come out on robotic surgery. But when you stand and look at those books, you're looking into the future a couple of years, and those books were usually written 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. Journal papers, maybe 1 year ago. And in order to be very reputable, those projections have to be kind of constrained and limited. They have to stick with what you can almost see on the horizon. It has to practically be here to be included in those kinds of works. Another alternative is to read science fiction or future fiction that talks about where this might go a long time in the future. And doing that in science fiction has a very long tradition. It's not new to the field of science fiction and futurist fiction. Science fiction has been both predicting and creating the future for over 100 years. And some of the classic examples of that are Captain Kirk in Star Trek reaching down to his belt and pulling up his cell phone to call his friends on his spaceship. That was filmed in 1965 and didn't become a reality until 20 or 30 years later. But in science fiction, they were able to show the device what its capabilities might be and build a story around why those capabilities are very valuable and powerful in a society. And then you have the same kind of science fiction prediction with Hal in 2001, A Space Odyssey, when he and Dave argued about the best way to manage the spaceship. And in that case, they made Hal the AI not necessarily evil, but not necessarily under complete control either. And so they painted a picture of how things might go very well and not so well in the future. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about 4 areas of technology that I cover in the books that I write about future fiction and robotic surgery. We're going to limit ourselves to instrumentation, cameras, and artificial intelligence because of the time limit. In instrumentation, the first thing that is actively happening right now and will continue to happen is the miniaturization of the instruments. If you're familiar with the Da Vinci surgical robot, you'll know that the patient side cart weighs about 800 pounds. Fantastic machine, but there are already companies pushing to make that much, much smaller, as you can see with a couple of the examples here. And if you make it smaller, that doesn't mean it's just less weight to lug around the operating room. That means that you can do operations in places like the throat, on the eyes, in the ears, and on small ligaments of your hand. And that opens up the frontier even more broadly. Another interesting speculation is the number of fingers that could go on the ends of these instruments. Going all the way back to surgery 1.0 and carrying through to 2.0 and 3.0, our instruments have always been scissor-like. They've been 2-fingered, like pliers or scissors, and that's all that we've used in these surgical procedures. But if you can imagine a digital assistant in the robot with you that could help with the control of the instruments, then that unlocks the limitation on how these instruments are designed. And the instruments can contain 2 or 3 or 4 or 15 fingers, whatever number is required to do the job at hand. And each one of those fingers can have the number of joints that's necessary to do the job well. By this picture, I'm not implying that instruments should have 5 fingers that are shaped like the human hand. I'm saying they need to have the number of fingers and the number of joints that are necessary to do the job very well. And that controlling those fingers and joints might be the job of your digital assistant instead of your surgeon's hand being transferred to the robot. The area of cameras is ripe for innovation as well. Right now, all minimally invasive and robotic surgery is done through a soda straw. The surgeon is looking through a very high-tech soda straw that delivers a bright, vivid, high-definition picture for them to look at, but it can't see above and below, left and right of a very narrow field of view. It doesn't have peripheral vision, but beyond that, it doesn't look at the entire surgical space. And there's no reason that it shouldn't be able to do that. The end of that one shaft that carries the camera should be a spherical camera that looks in all directions at the same time. It collects the imagery from straight in front of the camera, left, right, above, and a little bit behind, and all of that imagery is available at all times. Now, the surgeon themselves, being a limited human with forward vision, would have to turn their head or their eyes left or right to access the image that's already available to them. But they wouldn't have to drag the camera left and right physically to see what's there. And as we speculated before, watching that entire scene, left, right, up, down, backwards, and everything, would be a digital assistant, would be software that could identify when there's a problem like bleeding off to the left, and it could inform the surgeon that it can see that a blood pool is forming that's out of the surgeon's field of view, and they might want to turn their attention there right now, rather than waiting until the surgeon happens to look over there, which might be later during the procedure when more blood has been lost, for example. Now, if we're improving cameras, there's no reason we have to limit ourselves to that one spherical camera in the middle of the surgical space. You could implant roving cameras from a gun-like dispenser that would drop these small cameras at different locations in the surgical space, and they could look at it from different angles. From different angles, they can see the tissue from a different perspective, and there are small crevices that you could have them pointed down into so they could see the field that is not accessible to the main camera. And you could have one of these, two of these, three of these, four of these. There's a lot of visual data that could be collected, and you're essentially building an image from every perspective inside the surgical space. And as you say, well, the surgeon can't see all of that themselves. No, they can't. The point is that you can integrate all of those video sources into one feed that can be processed by software or by an AI so that it knows what's happening everywhere in the surgical space. And it can give advice to the surgeon on things that are outside of the surgeon's perception. We already do that with self-driving cars. We don't limit them to looking straight ahead and having to spin their camera around to look out backwards. They see forward, backwards, left, and right simultaneously and understand what's happening in every direction simultaneously. That same concept needs to be put to use in surgery in the future. So we've made several references to our digital assistant, which is probably some form of artificial intelligence. We expect in the future that the surgeon isn't there alone. The surgeon isn't making all of their decisions. They aren't having to process all of the input data and see all the imagery all by themselves. They will have an AI digital assistant that will help them with that and will give them advice at first, and that can gradually take over more responsibilities and actually do some of the things itself. For example, you might give the AI control of some of those mobile cameras and have it do the job of driving them and looking for problems. Or you might give it control of one instrument and let it use that instrument when it sees a problem arising. So do I expect that there will be full AI automation of surgeries in the future? 100% yes, I expect that. And I expect it because there's at least one robot that's in the market today that could automate surgery right now, but chooses not to. The Mako robot was designed to do hip and knee surgeries, and currently the robotic arm holds onto the instrument and the human hand holds onto the instrument, and together they cut away bone, and the robotic arm serves as the guide rails that we talked about before, and doesn't let the human surgeon color outside the lines, or more importantly, cut and drill outside the lines. But from its very beginning, the manufacturers of this robot knew and showed that their robot could do all of that cutting and drilling independently without the surgeon having to put their hand on the instrument. They chose not to do that because surgeons weren't ready for that kind of independence from a machine. Patients were probably not comfortable with that kind of a procedure, and most likely insurance companies were not prepared to pay for and back that kind of surgery. So society just wasn't ready for it. The technology is there now, but socially, we're not ready to go where the technology has already paved a road for us to go. As we move forward, computers, machinery, and AI are going to create for us better tools for the surgeon to use, and also better partners to assist the surgeon in the job that they're doing. And sometimes that partner will just give cognitive information, and sometimes they'll take an active role and actually take control of instruments and do pieces of the surgery. So we talked about new technology in surgery and where you can learn about it. This book on artificial intelligence in surgery is brand new, and it's a fantastic resource. And it will take you from 2023 to 2025. But if you want to think beyond that, you really need to look at future fiction or science fiction, which are the kinds of books that I've been writing, because I want to explore that space in a more free way than I could while talking at a conference or writing a chapter in a book. So thank you very much for your presentation. I'm available to give custom versions of this at your organization's events, and here's the contact information where you can reach me.